I'm recording my homily for the 29th Sunday of Ordinary Time, and we're getting closer and closer to the end of our liturgical year, where we end with the feast day of Christ the King, and that's usually right after Thanksgiving. And then from then we go into the season of Advent with our new liturgical year. This Sunday I'm going to focus on something that I'm going to tie into next Sunday as well. So next Sunday is traditionally in our diocese Stewardship Sunday, and so that's a Sunday that we talk about money. But we talk about all the different forms of stewardship, how we use our time, how we use our talents, and how we use, as we say, our treasure, our money. But this week I'm going to talk about money a little bit differently. So I'm going to kind of use the balance system. If next week I talk about how we use it in a good way, this week I'm going to talk about how we can use it in a bad way and how it can become a trap for us. If you remember last week, I talked about how Jesus on the cross, he demonstrates to us he shows us the solution to the four possible temptations or four lies that the world will present to us as the lie of what will bring us happiness. And one of those lies is that our wealth, our money, will bring us happiness. It can certainly do a lot of good things, but it's not going to necessarily bring us happiness. So if money is our goal in life, we're not going to be happy. In fact, we'll be very, very frustrated. We'll be like Ebenezer Scrooge, right? So this week I'm going to focus on the bad side of money. And if you don't watch my video all the way through, the essence of what I'm getting at this week is how Jesus was constantly fighting against corruption. And how money can corrupt us. Other things can corrupt us too, but just essentially how wealth can corrupt us. A few years ago, I went on a mission trip to Honduras with a group from the Tacoma area, Tacoma, Washington, and when we were down there, there was a day where we went to get some supplies for a little project we were doing at the orphanages there, and one of our vehicles got pulled over by the police. And down there, if you get pulled over, really the police officer's just looking for a bribe, right? In Spanish, they have a word for it. It's called the bite, right? Where they take a bite out of your wallet. And $10, $20. We had plenty of money. It wasn't that big of a deal. But the driver of that vehicle refused to pay the bribe. He refused to give the police officer anything. And so he sat there for like 3 hours because the police officer, he kept saying, I want you to bring your superior because I feel like there's an injustice here. Anyways, he refused to pay the bribe. And it wasn't because of the money. So afterwards, we asked the driver and we said, why didn't you just pay it? We sat there for 3 hours. Why not just pay it? Especially we didn't want to cause any problems, especially if there's corruption, right? We didn't want to get on their radar. And the driver said, if you compromise with corruption in small ways, it's only a matter of time before corruption begins to destroy your country. And he was just telling us that corruption has destroyed Honduras in many ways. And so he wanted to be part of the solution, which was extremely admirable. To us as foreigners, it was frightening, but to him, he was like, no, I'm not going to participate in the corruption. Jesus, throughout the Gospels, he's so frustrated with the Pharisees and the leaders, not because they're Pharisees or leaders, not because they're the people in charge, not because he disagrees with the covenants of the Old Testament. It is because of corruption. It is because these leaders are leading for themselves and not for the people. And so that's where I want to go with this, is just to go a little bit deeper with that. And why Jesus? Why is Jesus so adamant about not compromising with corruption? Pope Francis, when he was elected Pope, one of the reasons he was elected Pope, at least I'm going on hearsay here, but I think it makes sense, is that the cardinals recognized, when they came together, they recognized they needed a Pope who could do a number of things, but one of which was root out the corruption inside the Vatican. Because not everybody in the Vatican is corrupt, but there are a few. And one in particular area was the Vatican Bank. And so the Vatican Bank had lots of problems. I really don't know why we have a bank, as the Vatican, but we do. On Sunday, we celebrate the feast day of St. John Paul II. And St. John Paul II, he tried. I remember reading articles about him trying to root out the corruption of the bank, trying to reform it, but it didn't really happen. The corruption was just really, really deep. And it was like whoever was corrupt was just putting on a mask for the Pope and just diverting. And so he never was able to really find a solution. Pope Benedict, who came in after him, same thing, he tried. You read articles about him trying, and both John Paul II and Benedict, they lived very simple lives. They were not ostentatious, they didn't expect the nicest of things. They were very holy men, but they simply didn't have the ability to root out the corruption. And I know you're thinking, well, they were Pope, they have supreme authority, how could they not have? But to root out corruption, very challenging, right? Jesus came to understand that. You think it was hard for the Pope? Look at Jesus, who was trying to root out corruption. So when they looked for the next Pope, they wanted a Pope who was really strong on that area, who could make some progress, who could really deal in a strong-handed way with those who were corrupt. And because Pope Francis, who became Pope Francis, he had a reputation in Argentina for being very strong-handed with those who were corrupt, those who would misuse the system, who would abuse the institution for their own personal gain. He did not tolerate it at all. And so they chose him, at least in part, for that. And he's working on it. He continues to make some progress, but you hear about just how deep that corruption is. Now, as I'm going through this, I don't want you just to be saying, oh, wow, those Vatican idiots, and that's not the purpose of this. The purpose is to recognize that whether we talk about our beloved spouse, our church, which is guided by the Holy Spirit, but is full of sinners, right? Whether we're talking about our church, whether we're talking about our parish community or our family, or we're thinking about the businesses where we work, or even more personally what happens in our heart, there is corruption, right? It's there. We can't point the finger at anybody without first pointing the finger at ourselves. There is corruption. And so this is where Jesus wants to work, obviously. Now, as we try to go a little bit deeper with this, because we're going to stop pointing the finger at others and start pointing the finger at ourselves and saying, okay, in my own heart, am I rooting it out? Have I rooted it out? What more work do I need to do? I want to use a few stories. So, Saint Francis, not Pope Francis, but Saint Francis, right? Saint Francis of Assisi. When he first formed his order, he was out in the town. He was walking around with his brothers, preaching the gospel. There was this one particular day where he was inside the church, right? So I'm standing on the side of St. Mary's Church here in Marysville. And so he was in the church praying with one of his brothers. Well, this brother noticed down on the ground, somebody had dropped and left a silver coin. Now that was worth a lot of money. And so he had dropped a silver coin. The brother picked it up and then took it as they exited the church. Now, the thing with Francis, you have to understand, was that back then in his order, they had nothing to do with money. The rule was they would have no money. They would never earn money. They would never accept money. So when they were out begging, they would only accept food or clothing or tools, because they did try to do some work. But they would never accept cash. They would never accept money, right? So this brother comes out with this money, this coin, very valuable coin, and he shows it to Francis. And he says, brother, look at what we can do for the poor. Now, he's very sincere. He had a lot of love for the poor. But the problem was he was trying to use money. Now, you may be saying, well, hey, what's wrong with that, right? What's Francis's problem? Why can't you use money if you're going to use it for good? Again, bear with me, be patient, I want to go a little bit deeper. So he shows him the coin and Francis says, oh, brother, you've done wrong. You've done wrong. And he's like, no. We can help the poor. I don't want it for myself. I want to just help the poor. And Francis says, no, you have done wrong, because you're already betraying who we put our faith in. And so, to teach a lesson, Francis was a good teacher. He's a powerful teacher. He had the brother take the coin and put it in his teeth, right? And bite down on it. And then he told the brother, he said, now you have to remember at the time, they had horses in the streets, lots of horses, right? And so he said, brother, I want you now to take that coin and I want you to find the nearest pile of horse poop, right? Just out in the street. And I want you to put that coin into the horse poop with your teeth, right? He never forgot that lesson. Now, whether you agree or disagree with it, it was a powerful lesson. What Francis was trying to teach his brother was that as soon as we begin to think that we have to have money in order to do good, we're already corrupt. We're already corrupted. The power of the gospel is not dependent on money. Can we use money? Yes. You know, in the church, when I go in these little villages out in the third world countries, and when you've been there, and you see these beautiful little churches and these poor little villages, and you're thinking, oh, I wonder if that's corruption, you know, by the church. But you talk to the people, and the people say, no, 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 no. We want the nicest building in the village to be God's home, where we go to worship. There's no corruption there, but it did take money. It was good things that happened, but it took money to do it, right? And the people were very generous to do that. If you look at the Catholic Church around the world, you'll find that we are often the ones who are building hospitals. We are often the ones who are building institutions to help the poor people. There's nothing wrong with that. It takes money to do that, right? However, the gospel, the message of Jesus Christ, costs nothing. To go out in the community and to share the faith that we've been given, that we receive every day in this building, which was built with money, yes, but every day to receive the Eucharist, that costs no money. And then to share it costs no money. And Francis wanted the world to see a powerful witness of that. That's why they would have nothing to do with money. He says, I just want people to see Jesus Christ, to see faith, and to see that it doesn't take anything other than a person transforming their life and then carrying it out into the world. About 2 years ago, and I've already mentioned this many times, 2 years ago I went to the Archbishop here and I asked to start a religious order, and I presented a plan, a very basic plan, and I've since modified it and developed it a little bit. But the order was essentially built on that original rule of life of St. Francis, where we would have no money. We wouldn't use money. We'd never touch money. It just wouldn't be part of our ministry. And the first response that I always hear, and that I think, you know, when I think about this is that possible? You know, can you go through life without money? Is that possible? Most of the Franciscan orders today, I should say all the Franciscan orders that I know of, have capitulated. They said, no, you got to have money. And so they've changed their rule to allow for that they can have money. So I presented that to the Archbishop, and he kind of, you know, scratched his head and said, yeah, we'll think about it. And I think we'll be thinking about it for a very long time. But it is that idea that we become easily corrupted. And so for me, because I become easily corrupted, I'm very materialistic. I love things. I love things that can be bought by money. I love tools, right? I love building things. So you know Dante's Inferno, the book that he wrote. Well, that's part of the book. So Dante's Inferno, you have this story where I think it's Dante, or who is it? Virgil. Somebody's walking around and they're getting a tour of hell, right? And there's all these different levels in hell, and every level is where the punishment fits the crime. And so in hell, you have the people who were robbers, and so their punishment fits the crime. And you had people who were liars, and the punishment fits the crime. And the adulterers, and punishment fits the crime. My level in hell, if I go to hell, I'm going to have to carry around a giant sack with all the tools I've ever bought, and with all the tools I've ever wanted to buy. And this bag is going to continually just crush me, right? That's going to be my punishment in hell. But anyways, given the fact that I am very weak in this area, but I've also tasted what it's like to try to trust God without needing to trust anything else, without that corruption. I've had small tastes, right? I've got a long ways to go. But I understand St. Francis. I understand Pope Francis' desire for simplicity in his clergy. I understand Jesus Christ, who told his disciples, take no money with you, right? I understand all of those things. But what catches my heart is the fact that the fewer things I have, the fewer things that I think I need, the more free I am to trust Him, to trust God. Because you know what we do with money? We say, well, I need this. And so then we just intrinsically put our faith in that. We say the parish needs this, the parish needs another building, the parish needs that. Well, then I've intrinsically put my faith into the money that will purchase that building or whatever it may be, the materials, right? Whereas with God, when I don't have that, then I have to trust Him. You know, being in communities with lots of immigrants, I tell you, immigrants, lots of times, they come here, they're very poor. They have no retirement plan, other than their kids. But they have no retirement plan. They have no 401k. They have no income. They have no Social Security built up that they'll receive. They have nothing. And yet you see their faith and they say, well, God's will be done. God will provide. And that's so gospel. That's so much from the Gospels. That's how Jesus lived. You know, I have nowhere to lay my head. There was just this trust that God would provide. Last week I had my debit card hacked, and so they canceled it and they're going to send me a new one, right? You know, I'm not sure I'm ever going to be able to give a homily where there isn't some noise in the background. I hope it's not too loud, but there's a gentleman cutting bushes over here. That's why I'm shouting. So last week my debit card was hacked, and so they canceled it, so the bank's going to send me a new one. But in the meantime, I didn't even really think about it because I have no credit cards. In my desire to grow in simplicity, I got rid of my credit cards. I had no money, and so I went to the store to buy a tool, of course, Home Depot. And I get to the check counter, and I have no money. I have no way to pay for it because I had forgotten. Because I've never had that before. I've always had money. I've always had food on the table. I've always had shelter. I've always had everything I've ever needed. And I had to go and put it back because I couldn't buy it. And it was like this brief moment, because I just could easily just go to the bank and then get the money from the bank, right? I just didn't have a card. But for this brief moment, I knew what it was like to be poor. I know it's silly, but it was a brief moment. And you know, it's in those moments where it's like, who do I trust? What wealth do I have? If I have no money, what wealth do I have? In the gospel today, you have, I'm going to tie in the gospel now. I should have gotten to it a lot sooner. The gospel is where the Pharisees are coming back at Jesus and trying to get revenge. They're trying to get revenge because he's been blasting them in the parables that they are corrupt, they are corrupt, they are corrupt. And so finally they come back at him, and because they want to convince the people not to follow him. So what they do is they hatch this plan. And the irony of all this is that they use money because they value money, right? That we tend to do that. That when we want to make a point of something, we use something that we value. Well, they valued money. Jesus didn't. So they're already up a creek here without a paddle because Jesus doesn't care about the money. But he accepts the challenge. And so he says, show me the coin that's going to pay this tax, right? So the test was that if Jesus said it was okay to pay the census tax, then they could turn that against him by saying that he's on the side of the Romans. And then he can say to the people and the zealots and everybody else who didn't like the Romans, he say, look, he's just really for the Romans. He's not for you. right? So he would lose his popularity, if you will, which was again something that they wanted. Jesus didn't care about that. But if he says, no, you can't pay the census tax, the Roman army is bad, then they could turn him into the Romans for insurrection. And so they thought they had this trap, checkmate either way. It didn't work. So Jesus takes the coin and he says, who's on the coin? Well, Caesar's on the coin. The Roman emperor's on the coin. And he is making a very, very basic point that's powerful. And it reminds us, if you pull out a dollar bill, you say, who does this money belong to? And then you're tempted to say, well, it belongs to me. It's like, no, it doesn't. You own the paper, but you do not own the value, unless the government says that that paper has value. There's a little 1 on it, or a little 5 on it, or a 10, or a 20, or a 50, or 100. There's the value, but the government determines that value. And that value can easily change. And you have the paper, but that's about all you own. And so Jesus is saying, give then to the one whom owns that value, if you want to give the value. If you want to give it, but give it to the one who owns it. And so that's Caesar. That's our government, right? He's not saying it's bad, he's just saying give it to the one who gives it value. But by golly, give to God what belongs to God. So what belongs to God? Well, that's what we're going to pick up with next week, right? In the end, it's us, but it's everything we do. It's everything we think about. It's everything we say. It's everything we desire. We conform that to the one who gives us the most precious treasure in the world. All right, God bless.